where the headquarters of the Watchtower organization is located. And then after a few years, I was invited to become a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, which supervises their work in the entire world. The 9 years that I spent on that supreme body changed my whole attitude about the religion. I could see that they were not really governed by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, but everything was based upon organizational policy and tradition.
Why is the organization so afraid of a book written by one of their own former leaders? What is hidden on page 216 that they simply don't want you to read? If you are caught with this book in your home, or even a PDF on your phone, the consequences are immediate. You are taken into a closed room, judged by a committee, and within days you can lose your family, your friends, and every relationship you have built over a lifetime. They don't counter the arguments in this book. They destroy the people who read it. What you are about to hear is not the opinion of an outside critic. This is the testimony of a man who sat at the head table, a man who voted on the rules that determined who would live and who would die. In this video, we are going to open the forbidden pages of Crisis of Conscience. I'm going to show you the exact internal mechanism that proves how life and death doctrines were decided like a corporate boardroom vote. And further in, you are going to discover the scandal involving Mexico and Malawi that was buried for decades, and that became the breaking point for the man who wrote this book. Because after you understand what really happened behind closed doors in 1983, your understanding of absolute truth will never be the same. The leak starts now. Part 1. The man who sat at the table. Raymond Franz was not a dissident. He was not some bitter ex-member nursing a grudge from the outside. He was a member of the governing body, the small closed group of men the organization presents as the exclusive channel between God and all of humanity on earth. He joined that body in 1971. For 9 years, he sat in those meetings. He read every internal document. He voted on every decision that came before the table. He wasn't studying the structure of power from a distance. He was part of it, at the very center of it, in the room where it happened. In 1980, he walked away. He didn't leave because of some hidden scandal or a sudden crisis of faith. He walked away because his conscience simply couldn't stomach what he was watching happen inside that room. That distinction matters, because the organization, when they talk about him at all, wants you to believe there was something wrong with the man, that he was proud, or rebellious, or spiritually weak. It's a much more comfortable story than the alternative, that a man of deep personal integrity looked at what was happening from the inside and decided he could not be part of it anymore. In 1983, he published Crisis of Conscience. Now, to understand why that book hit the organization like a grenade, you have to understand what the information landscape looked like in 1983. There was no internet. There were no forums, no YouTube channels, no podcasts, no way for a former member in Ohio to connect with a former member in Germany and compare notes. Information inside the Watchtower organization was controlled with a precision that would make most institutions envious. Members had essentially one pipeline of information: the publications the organization itself produced. The Watchtower magazine, the books, the study materials, all of it filtered, edited, and approved by the same body that governed the members' lives. What happened in Brooklyn stayed in Brooklyn. This book ended that arrangement completely. For the first time, internal documents were placed in the hands of ordinary readers. Actual correspondence, meeting records, the real architecture of how decisions were made at the highest level of the organization. Not summaries, not paraphrases, the raw material. And the organization's response was telling. They did not call a press conference. They did not produce a point-by-point rebuttal. They did not invite scholars to compare Franz's account against their own records. They made the book itself a punishable offense. Possession of Crisis of Conscience became grounds for a judicial committee. Reading it could get you disfellowshipped. Sharing it with another member, even a close friend, even a spouse, could cost you your entire world inside the organization. Your family, your community, every friendship you had built over decades, gone. And predictably, inevitably, that response did the one thing the organization could least afford. It made people desperate to read the book. By the mid-1980s, Photocopied pages were circulating in secret. Members were passing them to each other the way dissidents pass forbidden literature under authoritarian governments. Quietly, carefully, always watching to see who was watching them. The more the organization warned against it, the more people went looking for it. That dynamic has never really stopped. Here is something worth sitting with, though. The people who read this book and left the organization, and there were thousands of them. They didn't leave because Franz talked them out of believing in God. They left because Franz dismantled the specific claim that this particular group of men had a unique, direct connection to God. That is a completely different rupture. You can walk away from an institution without walking away from everything the institution claimed to represent. And the governing body understood clearly that this was the more dangerous outcome. Not atheism. Clarity. Stay with me. Because the mechanism Franz actually documented, the internal process behind the doctrines, is something the organization has never addressed publicly. And when you see how it actually worked, you will understand why they chose silence. Part 2. How God's voice was decided by a show of hands. The Watchtower organization has a phrase they use whenever a doctrine changes. When something that was forbidden suddenly becomes permitted, or something permitted suddenly becomes a sin, they call it new light. The theology behind it is that Jehovah progressively reveals truth to his people, and the governing body, guided by Holy Spirit, receives that light first and passes it down the chain. This is not a secondary detail. This is the load-bearing wall of the entire structure. The authority to tell a member to refuse a blood transfusion rests on this claim. The authority to instruct a parent to cut off contact with a disfellowshipped child rests on this claim. The authority to decide what you can read, who you can speak to, what medical treatment you are allowed to accept. All of it flows from the premise that these men are not making decisions on their own. They are receiving direction from God himself. Raymond Franz documented exactly how that direction was produced. They voted. Not revelation, not unanimous spiritual consensus. They voted, with a formal threshold of 2/3. If a doctrinal position received the support of 2/3 of governing body members present in the room, it passed and became binding on millions of people worldwide. If it fell one vote short of 2/3, it was rejected. A teaching that determined whether a child would receive a life-saving blood transfusion could pass at 66% and fail at 65%. Franz doesn't just tell you this happened. He walks you through specific votes. He describes the debates in detail, the disagreements that ran across multiple sessions, the personal tensions between members, the arguments that stalled and restarted. He writes about men who would arrive at a meeting with one position and leave with another, not because of new scriptural evidence, but because of social pressure from other men in the room. He writes about issues where the governing body members themselves were openly uncertain about what a particular passage of scripture actually meant, and then voted anyway. Think about what is actually being described here. A group of men, uncertain about the meaning of an ancient text, take a vote. The vote passes. And the result of that vote is then communicated to millions of people around the world as the revealed will of God. People arrange their entire lives around it. People die for it. Franz had studied the New Testament in the original Greek. He knew the textual foundation for several of the organization's most rigid positions far better than most of the men voting on them. And he records the experience of sitting in that room and watching an interpretation get pushed through not because it was textually sound, but because a majority wanted it, or because reversing a previous vote would mean admitting the previous vote had been wrong, which was something the governing body was deeply, structurally resistant to doing. Because admitting a previous vote was wrong creates an immediate problem. If the governing body voted incorrectly last time, and that vote was presented to the membership as divine guidance, what does that say about divine guidance? The logic collapses quickly. So positions were defended long past the point where the men defending them had genuine conviction in them, and people on the outside, the members, paid the price for that institutional stubbornness in ways that were sometimes irreversible. The scandal they buried, Mexico, Malawi, and the 2 sets of rules. There are 2 stories in Crisis of Conscience that, once you place them next to each other, make it almost impossible to sustain the argument that this organization operates on consistent divine principle. The first story takes place in Malawi. During the 1960s and well into the 1970s, the political party controlling Malawi required citizens to carry a party membership card. This was not optional. Without that card, you were exposed to harassment by government-backed mobs, to violence, to outcomes far worse. The governing body's ruling was absolute. Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi could not purchase that card under any circumstances. Doing so represented, in the organization's interpretation, a pledge of political allegiance, a direct violation of Christian neutrality. There would be no exceptions. We are talking about men being beaten to death in the dirt, women facing unspeakable violence at the hands of organized mobs, entire families watching their homes burn to the ground with everything they owned inside, children left without parents, communities destroyed. And through all of this blood and terror, the organization back in Brooklyn refused to move a single inch. The members in Malawi who endured this were held up in Watchtower publications as extraordinary examples of faithfulness under fire. The governing body framed their suffering as spiritual refinement. The second story takes place in Mexico, at exactly the same time. Mexican witnesses faced a different version of the same doctrinal problem. Mexican law required male citizens to perform military service, and compliance felt like a violation of the same neutrality principle that was being enforced so rigidly in Malawi. The organization's position on military involvement was not ambiguous. But in Mexico, something very different was happening quietly. Witnesses were being permitted, without any public doctrinal statement, without any announcement to the broader membership, to bribe military officials in exchange for a cartilla, a document certifying completed military service that the men had never actually performed. The organization was aware of this arrangement. They allowed it to continue indefinitely. The cartilla was straightforward document fraud. The leadership in Brooklyn looked the other way. Let that sit for a second. Put these two realities next to each other and really look at them. In Malawi, people were being beaten and killed because the organization refused to allow them to make a symbolic political gesture that cost a few coins. The doctrinal justification was neutrality. In Mexico, the same organization, at the same moment in history, was quietly permitting bribery and the falsification of official government military records. The doctrinal justification for the exception was also neutrality. The difference between these two situations was not theology. It was not a more careful reading of Scripture. It was geography and political calculation. In Mexico, a quiet, pragmatic exception was organizationally convenient. In Malawi, it was not, and nobody in the governing body, at least not in time to prevent the deaths, stood up and demanded an answer to the question that Franz eventually could not stop asking out loud. If we can quietly bend the neutrality principle to spare Mexican members from inconvenience, what exactly were our brothers and sisters in Malawi dying for? He asked that question in the room. He documents the discomfort it created. He records that no satisfying answer was ever produced. And that silence, that institutional inability to answer a direct moral question, was the point at which his crisis of conscience became something he could no longer quietly manage. Part 4. The book that outlived the man. Raymond Franz died in 2010. The book did not die with him. In the 1980s, the organization had a practical advantage that partially offset the damage done by crisis of conscience. Access was the barrier. To read the book, you had to know it existed, find a physical copy or a photocopy of one, and find someone willing to risk their membership to hand it to you. That was a real obstacle. The organization understood this perfectly. Control the access, and you substantially control the narrative. That advantage is completely gone. The full text of Crisis of Conscience is available online right now. It takes minutes to download. A member can read it on the same phone they use to access the organization's official JW library app. The physical and logistical wall that gave the Watchtower a measure of protection for the book's first 2 decades no longer exists in any meaningful form. The organization knows this. You can measure exactly how much they know it by tracking the language in their talks and publications over the past 15 years. The warnings against apostate websites have become more
Hay que cambiar esta
frequent
decisión.
and more
But in
urgent.
2024,
The framing
the
around
court
spiritually
upheld this
dangerous
decision.
Pero
information
el año
has hardened
2024 ahora la
considerably.
Corte recibió esta apelación
Governing
también.
body
And so we
members began
appealed to
appearing
a
in
higher court
personal
in Norway.
video
Así
messages,
que tuvimos que ir a
a
la
format
corte,
they
una
avoided
corte
for
más
most
alta
of
ahí
the
en Noruega.
organization's
In February
history,
of 2025,
specifically to compete for
En
members'
febrero del
attention
2025,
against
our
outside
court, our
voices.
case was heard
They
for 2
understood they
weeks
were
by the
losing
Court
the
of Appeal.
information war and
Nuestro caso
adapted
fue
accordingly.
atendido durante unas 2 semanas por
But
la
the
Corte de
adaptation
Apelación.
created its own problem. Every time a governing body member looks into a camera and tells members not to trust what they read on the internet, a portion of the audience immediately wants to know what, specifically, they are not supposed to trust. The warnings function as a map. They name the threat. And the threat, in case after case documented by researchers and former member communities, leads directly back to the same book. Crisis of conscience appears in the exit accounts of former members who left for doctrinal reasons more consistently than any other single text. Not because it is dramatic or inflammatory, it is written with deliberate restraint. Not because it tells people what to conclude, it largely doesn't. It presents documentation and lets the documentation speak. And the reason that approach is so effective is precisely because it is so difficult to dismiss. You can attack a person's motives. You cannot as easily attack a meeting record or a piece of internal correspondence. The organization has never formally rebutted the content of Crisis of Conscience. They labeled Raymond Franz an apostate. They removed his standing. They made his name into a warning. But in 40 years, they have never produced a chapter-by-chapter response to his documentation. They have never released records that contradict his account. They have never invited an open comparison between his claims and their own archives. They have had 4 decades to make that case, and they have not made it. They made the book radioactive instead. And that specific choice reveals something. An organization that genuinely holds the truth does not need to suppress questions about its own history. Truth holds up under examination. It invites scrutiny, because scrutiny, properly applied, only confirms what is actually true. What truth does not require is a judicial committee for anyone who reads the wrong book. They were not afraid of Raymond Franz, the man. They were afraid of what Raymond Franz had written down, and more specifically, of what happens when ordinary members read it without someone from the organization standing next to them controlling the interpretation. Because documents are stubborn. They don't soften under social pressure. They don't change their account when the stakes get high. The question he left behind is not a complicated one. If the doctrine that Kos lives in Malawi came from God, why was Mexico handled differently? If a 2/3 vote produces divine direction, what exactly was the 1/3 who voted the other way receiving? And if possessing a book is serious enough to cost you your family, what is it about that book that makes it worth such an extraordinary effort to keep it out of your hands? He never claimed to have clean answers to all of it. What he had was a record, and he left it behind for anyone willing to read it. If this video reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me which part landed hardest. The Mexico and Malawi case alone has quietly broken open more certainties than almost anything else in this conversation. Subscribe if you want to keep following this investigation, because there is significantly more of this story still to cover. And if you have lived any part of this from the inside, your account matters. It belongs in this record.